of course, U.S. Attorney in D.C. Joe, I mean, the days go on and drip, drip, drip. We learn more about the way Comey operated as FBI director and now potentially more conflicts of interest for Bob Mueller. The reporting from Solomon in the Hill yesterday about this September 2016 meeting that 3 FBI agents had with this Russian billionaire trying to get him looped in on this Russian collusion narrative. He laughed at them and said that's ridiculous, and he hates Manafort. He's in a huge dispute with him. And they left empty-handed, but it looks like they were trolling for possible help to form their narrative right before the election.
Yes, the agents clearly were trying to suggest to Oleg Deripaska, who is a very wealthy oligarch who had worked with Robert Mueller in the past, seeking to find an FBI agent who had been taken hostage in Iran. The agents involved in interviewing him in September of 2016 probably crossed a number of lines, but we won't know that until we hear from Mr. Deripaska under oath, and I understand that attempts are being made to get him to go before the House Intelligence Committee for an interview. But this is all of a piece. What's going on now is the unraveling of a very substantial plot that had 2 goals: to exonerate Hillary Clinton illegally, and then, if she lost the presidency, to frame Donald Trump and his associates of crimes they did not commit. Robert Mueller has produced not a scintilla of evidence that anybody in the Trump campaign engaged in any illegal activity regarding illegal contacts with Russian officials. All of the contacts that we know about between anybody in the Trump campaign were perfectly legal when they occurred and remain so to this day. So what you may ask, is Mr. Mueller investigating? And the answer seems to be anything but that.
No, I mean, again, the time and the money and the media attention that has been trained on this phony Russian collusion narrative that now ends up in this the Southern District of New York as this offshoot investigation into poor old bumbling Michael Cohen. It's a farce. I mean, it literally, to me, looks like the Keystone Cops, except it's the presidency involved.
Well, what you have here is, first of all, an illegitimate investigation, which was started by Rod Rosenstein with no predicate criminal activity being involved. I have been told that, as you know, Mr. Rosenstein wrote a memo recommending all the reasons that James Comey should be fired. The president then acted on that memo and fired James Comey. Subsequent to that, and remember, at this point, there is no special counsel. Comey's been fired, and he doesn't think, Rosenstein, that we need a special counsel to investigate the firing because he gave the reasons to fire him. However, shortly after that, the president gives an interview to NBC and says, oh, well, sure, I fired him for that, but the real reason was the Russian probe and blah, blah, blah. At that point, that is when Rod Rosenstein, I'm told by people in the department, got mad, was embarrassed by what the president had said, and therefore made him look like a fool. And it was that day he decided to appoint Mueller, who he had interviewed the day before to be the next FBI director to replace James Comey. Mr. Rosenstein is an incompetent liar, and he has been advised, I am told, by General Kelly in recent meetings at the White House. He and Mr. Sessions have been told, your jobs are not secure.
Mm-hmm.
And there are reasons for them not to be secure. In Rosenstein's case, you have a vicious anti-Trump person at the Department of Justice who has never been anything else but someone who despises the President of the United States. And Jeff Sessions, a man who I love dearly and have known for years, who is clueless.
Well, and I think that, look, Jeff Sessions, God bless him, I mean, made the biggest mistake in picking that Rosenstein. I mean, Stein. You go back to that choice, and it was a bad choice. He wasn't even considered, I understand from a couple of his colleagues who were U.S. attorneys in his same class, he wasn't even considered in the top third of U.S. attorneys in that year, and yet he kind of hung around, and
yeah, he was the choice of the Federalist Society. They're the ones that pumped him up.
Yeah, well,
they're the ones that visited this upon the president.
Well, and the Federalist Society, just because it's called the Federalist Society, I know they're behind giving a lot of money to the inauguration, but they make mistakes, and this was a huge mistake. And we're just beginning to. I think we're just beginning to find out the truth about Mr. Rosenstein. Let's talk. Yeah, right. Yeah. There's a lot more here.
Yes.
Joe DiGenova, I want to play for you a soundbite from John Brennan back in February on Meet the Press, a Q&A about whether this dossier played any real role in the intel community's assessment.
When did you first learn of the so-called Steele dossier and what Christopher Steele was doing?
No.
It was in late summer of 2016. I did not know what was in there. I did not see it until later in that year. I think it was in December. But I was unaware of the provenance of it as well as what was in it. And it did not play any role whatsoever in the intelligence community assessment that was done, that was presented to then President Obama and then President-elect Trump.
Well, real clear investigations. Two colleagues contradict Brennan's denial of reliance on dossier. Two different, retired NSA director Mike Rogers and James Clapper both conceded in a recent CNN interview that the assessment was based on some of the substantive content of the dossier. So we got John Brennan called out again.
In addition, first of all, Mr. Brennan does represent the worst former CIA director in the history of the country. Never has there been a more partisan, more politically active, and someone who has denigrated the agency by his mere presence and activities. And I say that from conversations with a number of active operations officers at the agency and retired operations officers at the agency, as well as analysts. But it is abundantly clear from the available public record that Mr. Brennan has lied repeatedly from the beginning of this investigation in order to cover up something very important. It was he and Clapper is now beginning to realize that he has a great deal to lose as a result of his multiple perjurious appearances before Congress. It is very obvious that Clapper and Brennan conspired with Comey to get information from British and American intelligence sources to create a false narrative to allow for the electronic surveillance of American citizens and the electronic surveillance of the opposing presidential nominee and candidate, Donald Trump. This is, without a doubt, the single greatest political scandal in the history of the country. It is of no significance to the American mainstream media, but I assure you, in the long run, this will unravel, and Mr. Brennan and Mr. Clapper will find themselves in front of a grand jury. And by the way, if Mr. Huber from Utah, who was appointed by Jeff Sessions to begin the investigation into the FISA warrants, into the unmasking, into the leaks of the unmasking, if Mr. Huber does not put these people, Clapper and Brennan and Comey, in front of a grand jury relatively soon, then I fear that his efforts will not be justifiable or credible.
Well, I think, again, when we, in the light of day, are able to hear from people who are not either tethered to their current government roles, when information is unredacted that never should have been redacted in the first place, when documents are actually delivered in a timely fashion, when we're able to hear from people like Deripaska and others. I think, Joe, from the very beginning, you've been right. This was a setup from day one. This Carter Page, the idea that guy, God bless him, could conspire with anyone is just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. And Manafort, I mean, Manafort was hated by the Russian billionaire at issue, Deripaska. He's in litigation with him right now. I mean, he's fighting over fees and ridiculous.
What's very interesting is that in the indictment of Paul Manafort, involving all of his Ukraine stuff and all this stuff about failing to register, a lot of the activities that are referenced in there are stuff that Deripaska was involved in. And yet, Bob Mueller kept Deripaska's name out of the indictment completely. There was no reason to do that. There was no reason to keep his name out other than to cover up the fact that Mueller had been dealing with him for years. But when all is said and done, it is very obvious that Carter Page was set up by the FBI and British intelligence to plant information with him that was false, that he would repeat, that would then be regurgitated back to American intelligence and used in FISA applications. The same thing is true of Papadopoulos. False information was planted with him so that he would repeat it and that it would then get back to the United States, be picked up on FISA, and would be used to continue FISA taps. And it is now clear that a dual citizen of the United States and the UK who has connections to the CIA, who is a known Trump hater, who teaches at universities in the United Kingdom, was the person who set all of this up in conjunction with Brennan and Clapper. This is not going to go away. And all of this crap from Rod Rosenstein about protecting sources and methods and who the source is in the letter, everybody already knows who the source is in the letter. He's a dual citizen from the United States and from the UK, and his initials are known to everyone with a brain.
Well, I think, again, the good thing here is that Americans, I think, are beginning to see through all of this. I mean, this Avenatti is unraveling before our eyes. I mean, Avenatti seems like he's the kind of guy you would just imagine is going to unravel like Schneiderman unraveled. I'm not saying with the same fact pattern or anything, but there's something about him. It's just I think ultimately the more you see him, he doesn't wear well. Now he's threatening to sue the Daily Caller, Joe, because of their writings about his shady dealings. He's now threatening to sue various news organizations, apparently.
Yeah, well, he's a very unusual man. That's all I'll say about him, and I would hope that he would be waterboarded soon.
Joe DiGenova, literally one of my favorite people ever. Joe, thank you so much. We'll see you tonight on TV.
See you tonight, Laura.
All right,
Thanks
we'll take a break. 855-40 Laura. I love